You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making it.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 280 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. On today's show, I'm going to be talking about the Khashoggi murder. The CIA, I think, has just, as the time I'm recording this show, briefed Congress on what they have as evidence of ties that Jamal Khashoggi was ordered to be murdered by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. And then I got a lot of other news to cover on today's show as well. You know, I tried to keep up with current events on this show and not, spend entire shows on, let's say, the Yemen war, but rather, talk about the Yemen war once or twice a week, to talk about the latest developments in that. And so, if you're following this show, it may be helpful to subscribe to it on one of the podcatchers. That way you make sure you're kind of getting them in order, because a lot of times I build upon the stories as they come out. This has definitely been the case with the Khashoggi murder. I've also done 2 episodes of the Around the Empire podcast with Joanne Leon and Will Porter. And I'll link to those in the show notes page where we talk about a lot of detailed analysis, especially in the second episode on kind of the political things going on behind the scenes there. So check out that work. Keep up to date on this show. Subscribe, rate and review, especially like on iTunes and the bigger sites. It's on YouTube, BitChute as well. And then, of course, at the Libertarian Institute, where you can also find my daily news roundup. And the URL there is libertarianinstitute.org. And the last thing I'll mention is that I'm coming up on the end of the year. I'm really going to hit my year-end goals. It's really exciting the amount of success I've had this year on the podcast. And so, as we get to the end of the year here, maybe if you could just try to, suggest the show, really recommend it to somebody, push to get me a new listener in the, next month, to help, me push past all those, big goals I had set for the show at the beginning of the year. I know a lot of you do this for the show and I really do appreciate it, but explain to people, look, that this is the most money, it's thousands of American lives, the lives of tens of thousands of other people, and disruptions that cause total unnecessary poverty around the world. And so it really is, I think, the most important issue. And, this is just a show about, all the things going on in the American empire. All right. So Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman has, I think, been a train wreck, in his political rise in Saudi Arabia. In 2015, he becomes deputy crown prince and defense minister and starts a war in Yemen. The name of the war is Decisive Storm. And, so far that war is not over. It's caused huge amounts of death and destruction in Yemen. It's cost Saudi Arabia billions of dollars and lives of some of their citizens as well as some of their forces. It's created a situation where you've actually had the Houthis, the Yemeni rebel group, carrying out cross-border raids in southern Saudi Arabia, and of course the Houthi ballistic missile attacks against Saudi Arabia. So the war's been a complete failure. However, through some political maneuvering that I think some people have suggested amounts to a coup d'etat, he was able to name himself Crown Prince of an aging and decrepit king in Saudi Arabia, and many people describe him as the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia. A couple other MbS blunders in the past couple of years, is the GCC dispute where complete blockade and diplomatic isolation of Qatar, which is just a small peninsula off the Saudi coast, has pushed, a former ally of Qatar in both Yemen and Syria into a closer relationship with Saudi regional adversaries, Iran and Turkey. And at this point, we even have Qatar pulling out of OPEC, which, they're not a huge gas is an oil producer, but they produce mostly natural gas. So less important for oil. However, Qatar does play a big role in the global price of energy. And then, of course, the kidnapping of the Lebanese Prime Minister, Saad Hariri, along with the detain and, torture and murder of several of his cousins within the royal family, and a massive power grab there, becoming crown prince. The Hariri kidnapping didn't end up working out because the French prime minister really bailed him out and invited him to France. So, even Mohammed bin Salman couldn't murder a prime minister of a, quote unquote allied state when the leader of France had invited him to come to France. It would have just been too disgusting. But this latest blunder may be the worst, and that, of course, is the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. October 2nd, he enters the Saudi consulate in Turkey and is never seen again. Saudi Arabia initially denied the murder, but now admits to it. And now the CIA is releasing evidence. Two key things here. The first, I mentioned on the last show, is that the CIA is assessing with a moderate to high degree of confidence that Mohammed bin Salman likely targeted Khashoggi and probably ordered his death. And now we have the CIA saying, this is through a leak to the New York Times, that there were 11 communications between Mohammed bin Salman and one of his top advisors at least, and a member of the Khashoggi assassination squad, Saud al-Qatani, I believe is how you say it, but I'll have Will Porter on sometime in the next couple of weeks, and he'll tell me how to pronounce that one actually. And this seems, to me, all but an absolute indictment of Mohammed bin Salman in the murder here of Jamal Khashoggi. Now, for some crazy reason, Donald Trump has really doubled down on his support for Saudi Arabia and has attempted to kind of sweep this under the rug rather than, looking for maybe some regime change in Saudi Arabia. This is, of course, like a royal family situation, and so a different branch of the family could certainly usurp power. And I don't know, I guess I wouldn't be surprised to see the CIA involved in something like that under the orders of Donald Trump, rather than actually taking the side of Mohammed bin Salman here. Also, with, I think, the United States lead, the global community could probably make a pretty effective effort to get the Saudi royal family to at least have Mohammed bin Salman step down as crown prince. And, even if that means another member of that branch of the family takes power, a very soft kind of coup situation. It's very shocking to me that Trump has doubled down so hard on the Saudi state as it currently is. Of course, Mohammed bin Salman does have a closer relationship with Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and the two of them have been pretty public, about this relationship. So what happens from here is pretty interesting. I think through the Magnitsky Act, which has mainly been used to target Russia, if the Senate were to find that, Mohammed bin Salman did order this murder, I think they would be able to sanction Mohammed bin Salman, and that would seem, at least to me, to really hurt the Saudi ability to do business with the United States. And so who knows, this could be the move that ends up forcing Mohammed bin Salman to step down. Certainly he doesn't seem like the kind of leader the U.S. would want in Saudi Arabia, as he's, been shown to be pretty reckless and irrational. Also absolutely ruthless. I'll remind everybody again, SJ Res 54, the act that's going to hopefully help to end the Yemen war here. I'm going to link to an article in the show notes page on from The Hill, which actually goes through and breaks down the entire kind of process for SJ Res 54 that lies ahead, including lots of amendments. And so, it may be important as we go along here, like 3 or 4 times, we're actually going to have to call our senators and tell them, don't vote for this amendment because it really hollows out all the teeth of this resolution. And so, the fight is on here. And, like I said, check out that article. It gets, in detail. It kind of gets boring and confusing to me because I'm not like a legislator or very interested in what Congress is doing usually. However, it does seem like there are a lot of loopholes and all kinds of traps that could befall the bill to come. Of course, the war in Yemen that's being waged by Saudi Arabia and supported by the United States is a food war against the people of Yemen. They're trying to create a situation where the people of Yemen have 2 options: to starve to death or comply with the Saudi regime. And of course, all orchestrated by Mohammed bin Salman, makes him one of the, worst, evil, ruthless leaders in history. And what does it say about the presidents Trump and Obama Obama who, got this whole thing rolling, and Donald Trump who's gone along with it. The other reason this bill is so important is because, at the end of October, the Saudis are finally admitting to the Khashoggi murder, and the political pressure there continues to heat up. You had the midterm elections coming up, and I think Trump felt like he had to do something, here with Saudi Arabia. And so they put a 30-day, demand on Saudi Arabia that there be a ceasefire in Yemen. Those 30 days have come and gone, and it looks like the U.S. really isn't concerned with enforcing this, and things are going to continue as normal. And so this, bill now is, really going to be the only thing here that's going to be a resolution. Another, note kind of related to this whole subject here, Saudi Arabia, is Saudi Arabia and Russia have agreed to continue their kind of OPEC-aligned oil production marts. And, so this is kind of the agreement here where, they agree to produce so many barrels of oil, more or less to help fluctuate the price. Right. Kind of continuing a discussion I had from the last show about Mark Lamont Hill, who got fired from CNN for, being supportive of the Palestinians here. We have this really terrible narrative that prevents anybody from taking a good position on this Israel-Palestine issue, and that is being pro-Palestine is equivalent to being a Nazi. And it's just simply not true. The fact that Israel has made itself a Jewish nation state is only a sign that the government of Israel is racist. It has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that anybody who opposes what the Israeli government does has any feelings about Jews. And so you have movements in the United States that try to take hold, like people who want liberation of Palestine, or I think Students for the Justice of Palestinians or something along those lines as a group. And, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions people. And they all get smeared as Nazis. And so it makes their message very unpopular because, is it really worth it to even try to learn and take a stand on an issue if the only position you could take is the side of the Israelis because, or else, you're just another one of them Nazis. But we do seem to be breaking down that narrative a little bit. Scott Horn has some great interviews in the past year that seem somewhat optimistic, particularly with Ramsey Barut and Grant Smith, who have, Grant Smith does some polling, and Ramsey Barut's a Palestinian and a, activist for the movement and a writer. And, they say that, they see these tides changing. I think one good example of this is we have 2 U.S. police forces now saying that they're not going to go train with the Israeli Defense Forces, which of course are a, militarized group that goes out and oppresses the Palestinians, shooting several thousand of them as they protest near the wall of their prison in Gaza, and, oppressing even the most peaceful of Palestinian protests in the West Bank, including by spraying skunk water on people and their drinking water, destroying of the olive trees and bulldozing of the Palestinian homes to try to force them off of their land. And it's great to see, that we're finally staying up to this because, we really don't want our police forces trained by people who oppress, other people for this reason. Hell, I would think that even if you're like an American who's all gung-ho about the U.S. alliance with Israel because they're the democracy in the Middle East, that you at least think that, man, you really don't want your police being trained the way that, the Israeli police have to act to take care of, those bad, evil people, Arabs over there. You know what I mean? Do you want to see yourself as one of the Arabs? It just seems so clear. But I think what, makes it so impossible to, or slow, I guess, to make progress on this issue is just that very firm narrative that anybody who's kind of pro-Palestine is a Nazi. And, this leads people to losing their job at, quote unquote, respectable organizations like CNN. So the issue on the southern border here, there's a great Intercepted podcast. Jeremy Scahill hosts it. It's, like the first hour of it's all about the border crisis. And I know most of my audience is libertarian. And so, when they hear Jeremy Scahill and Intercepted, they're, thinking, oh God, this is kind of progressive left stuff. And yeah, it is. You're going to hear a lot of isms and, blaming and wagging their finger against capitalism. But the situation here is actually really a result of the U.S. empire and U.S. attempts at regime change and influencing Latin and Central America that has caused people to want to flee. And, regimes there that are now, oppressive of the people who, that's why they're leaving and, heading for the U.S. southern border. And so hopefully, you could put up with, somebody taking some hack shots at capitalism and just, sit here and listen to, the important detailed facts, about how U.S. foreign policy is responsible for a lot of this. He really highlights here the policy under the Obama years where, Hillary Clinton is Secretary of State and the Obama administration takes the side of a government that carried out a military coup d'etat against a popular, more left-wing leader in Hondarus. This has created a situation where the people who went out and supported that former prime minister were now afraid and fleeing for their lives. This is in part because a U.S. assisted trained force, the Tiger Force in Honduras, has carried out oppression of, protesters and stuff like that. And also whenever you have a violent government and a military government, these aren't secure regimes. You can't count on justice in court. Creates a lot of violence and a lot of problems. You also have the U.S. drug trade, and the drug war is a huge problem here. And so people are fleeing violence. And of course, all cultures have their problems and stuff like that, regardless of U.S. interventionism or not. It's not like it would be sunshine and flowers and there wouldn't be a few people maybe looking for a better life somewhere else anyways. So, Scahill makes the argument, and I think this is really important. And again, when we're talking about narratives, the narrative that we should try to create is that these people at the southern border really are migrants. They're refugees. This is a U.S. foreign policy gone wrong. And while the oppression of these people is by their own government and from the Honduran people in the forms of the thugs and the gangs that create so much violence there, these people wouldn't be in power and wouldn't be able to do what they do without the result of the U.S. foreign policy. So, credit where credit's due. Scahill does a good job of, criticizing the Obama policy pretty heavily and Hillary Clinton for her role in it as well. And I think this is definitely worth checking out if you want to learn more about it. I must say the other thing in that podcast, and this is related somewhat to foreign policy that they cover well, is this incident where you have the U.S. Border Patrol firing tear gas and I believe rubber-coated steel bullets across the border into Mexico. Now, first of all, there's some international issues here, and I know in the coming months, maybe even less than a month from now, you'll have a new president in Mexico. And so, Mexico could raise real problems for the United States on the international stage and at the UN because agreements, signed between all countries say you can't do this. The coverage in this Intercepted podcast is great on it, pointing out that this has happened several times before, including under the Obama administration. That isn't necessarily to justify it, but, you have these pictures being taken in the headlines and that you get in the news makes it sound like a very unique situation that's absolutely never happened before, and it has. Another thing I just want to note that I think is worth pointing out is that there's this practice now, and this has gotten worse under the Trump administration, especially under Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General, is the destruction and the persecution of people who leave water out in the desert areas for people to, drink as, they migrate across the border. They say this makes it easier for people to illegally enter the United States, but it also saves a lot of lives. And, that's a really important kind of thing. All right, some other stories we have here. Japan is going to look to acquire 100 additional F-35s. Sometimes I think even from libertarians, these kind of things are either celebrated or like, they create jobs. The worst part here is it continues to add to the misallocation of resources. And, Lockheed Martin is going to turn around, take this money from Japan and use it to lobby our Congress to get them to give us more of their tax dollars. This isn't a good thing. In the United States and, as libertarians, I think we should, advocate the fight against all weapon sales, not just, weapon sales to countries like Israel or Saudi Arabia. Trump and the Chinese President Xi have announced a trade truce. It looks like Trump is going to hold up on putting new tariffs against China, and China has agreed to, I think, buy some farm products and other things. I think both men will probably kind of try to build this as a political victory. the more goods that are flowing, the better is always my take. I'm not quite sure if this means the end of U.S.-Chinese tensions, especially with what looks like increasing U.S. interest in the South China Sea and in the Taiwan Strait. A fourth U.S. soldier has perished from a roadside bombing in the Ghazni province of Afghanistan. This is the province south of the country's capital. I think it was once considered a pretty secure province for the Afghan government. A couple very safe districts have fallen recently, and now you have this roadside bombing that was manually targeted at a U.S. vehicle, detonated and highly effective, killing 4 Americans. It's absolutely tragic that this continues to happen in Afghanistan. It's a real head scratcher to figure out what the U.S. is fighting for there at this point. At best, it seems like it could be a stalemate, but with the current U.S. troop levels in Afghanistan, the American and their Afghan government allies are only losing more territory, and more Americans are dying, and lots of Afghan forces are dying. The civilian casualties continue to mount here too. With the increase in success by the Taliban, the U.S. has launched more airstrikes in 2018 than previously in the war. I think that number started to be counted around 2011. We have a report from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which I don't think is probably the best source for the kind of statistics coming out of the Syrian civil war. I would say Air Wars is probably the most reliable. It's certainly not a terrible source. They say that U.S. airstrikes in Syria in the month of November alone are responsible for 206 civilian casualties. I just wanted to know, I saw AFRICOM on Twitter saying that they carried out a couple airstrikes in Libya against Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb. This is a group that's, I think, mostly formed out of blowback of the Obama intervention into Libya, kind of spread throughout West Africa there, and is now back into Libya. And I'm not sure if this has to do with, Obama defeating, or I guess throwing ISIS out of a city in Libya in 2016. There's certainly still ISIS attacks in Libya. Even in the past week there was one. But ISIS seems to be fading a little bit there, so maybe this is, just as I talked about in the past, a little bit more jihadist branding kind of thing, or if there's an increasing Al-Qaeda presence now in Libya, which will probably only be used as an excuse by the U.S. government to stay there even longer. All right, that's what I got for on today's show. libertarianinstitute.org, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, immersionnews.com, minds.com is a great crypto social networking site. I really like it, based on the blockchain. Check it out. My channel there is at Immersion News. Share, subscribe to the show, all that good stuff, and patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus.